right. So, don't worry about it. It's going to be all right. Look, everybody here, my wife, myself, we've all faced moments where we said, Lord, are you? Where are you, Lord? Anybody ever faced that? Amazingly, he always shows up. May I add, never too early, always on time. Always on time. He said, when you think you're gonna die, when you think, Lord, if you don't show up quick, it's over. Just like Peter, just before the man was dead, was sinking, if you remember, in the Sea of Galilee, just wham at the last minute. But Jesus said, now, why did you question? Why did you fear? Trust the light, please. You may be sitting there with pain all over your body. You may be sitting there with problems only God and you know about. But this Bible's, all things are possible to him that believes. All things. Everything. Great is thy faithfulness. Please tell him. Great is thy faithfulness. Look up and tell him. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed. All I have needed, thy hands have provided. Come on, tell him, saints. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy
She had osteoarthritis since 1997. She's had a tumor on her disc in her back, totally free from pain.
That's wonderful. Look how happy when they come up like that. That's so. Only they know what it's been like all this time. She says, look, you know, I love.
Paralyzed.
For people to help us in this ministry, not only in Dallas, but also in California. So please call today. That's 817-722-179. Father, thank you for your people. Now, Lord, bless your people today. Meet their needs today. Remove sickness, remove disease and infirmity in Jesus' mighty name. Heal your people. And Lord, we lay our hands on these needs today, and we believe you today for miracle in the lives of your people, I pray, for your name's sake. Somebody with a problem in your leg.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businesswomen, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. Pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet and yielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into retreat, but failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest, but they cannot the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured. Take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evils. I need the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies, all those who want security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight I ask for your prayer for all those who grieve, for the children's worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has ended. And I pray they will be comforted power greater than any of us, spoke the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day all Americans from walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, America.
President George W. Bush from the Oval Office, not quite, but almost 12 hours since the attack on the World Center plane hitting the Trade Center just a little bit past 8:45 this morning. The President said there is a quiet, unyielding air in the country. We were attacked, the United States, he said, because the country is a beacon of freedom. And in talking about the efforts to find the people responsible, he said we, the country, will not only go after those who did it, but those who harbor them. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, joins us. John.
Aaron, the President also calling this a mass murder, and we've been unable to get any estimates on those killed and injured. The President using the term thousands when discussing those killed today in the attack. That last point you were making could prove critical. The President saying the United States government will make no distinction between the terrorists who carried out this attack and those who harbor them. Just before the President was speaking, I checked in with a couple of congressional sources who are telling CNN that in private briefings today, key members of Congress were told by senior administration officials that the administration is, quote, confident, based on the early evidence in this investigation, quote, confident that Osama bin Laden is responsible for this attack. Now, in those briefings, we're told the administration did not say that with a certainty, but did say it was confident, that it had hard evidence in hand, that the investigation was continuing. That could be a significant thing to follow up in the days ahead based on the remarks of the President from the Oval Office to the American people tonight.
Mr. bin Laden has been an elusive character out there for a long time now. I guess he is on notice today. I think the president pretty clearly made that known. But he has not been easy to find, Mr. bin Laden, has he?
He has not been easy to find, and there has been a great deal of criticism, some from the Congress, some from members of this president's cabinet now during the prior administration, that the United States government was not doing enough on the second point, not only to try to go after Mr. bin Laden, but to take action against those governments that provided him sanction. That a key distinction the president making tonight, obviously, as we learn more about the investigation in the days ahead and the outreach from this government to allies around the world and perhaps to governments suspected of giving aid and comfort to Mr. bin Laden in the next few days as we assess the grim death toll and those injured in the days ahead. That's something else to keep an eye on as well. Aaron.
John, thank you. John King, our senior White House correspondent. Paula?
And earlier on, Aaron, we were talking with Jeff Greenfield about the challenge of the president delivering a speech where the toll has been so enormous. Jeff, your reaction to the president's words tonight?
They are the words that he had to speak. But again, the question is, when the president says, shaking the foundations of a building, but it did not shake our foundations and ourselves, that's what a president must tell us, and it's what we want to believe. But I ventured in the country today, there are a lot of shaken people, not just in this city. And I think the key is not so much the words that were said tonight, but what happens in the days and weeks ahead. How different a country are we going to find? How much are our movements going to be restricted by the need for more security? The only other point I want to underscore John King's point, Richard Holbrooke on our air said, if the Taliban is shielding bin Laden and he is the one responsible, they must feel force of all odds. When the president said we will make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor him, I think that's very much the point he was making.
There was a report in a newspaper that is actually based in London, where they actually indicated that Osama bin Laden had tapped this attack as long as 3 weeks ago. If that is true, one could expect there to be some political fallout from this.
Peter Bergen, who interviewed him 3 or 4 years ago, who was on earlier, made the point that every time bin Laden has mounted an attack on American interests or personnel, he has in fact telegraphed, as he did presumably with these Cole and other events. And he said bin Laden once targeted American soldiers, has now changed his view. Any American civilian, by virtue of being a taxpayer, bin Laden thinks, is complicit in what he regards as America's misdeeds. So, you know, that's why the speech tonight is just the first of a long chain of events whose end we can't possibly predict.
Meanwhile, as we all know, New Yorkers wake up to a completely different landscape here tomorrow. Public schools closed, the stock market closed, all flights in this country, domestic, international, postponed at least until noon tomorrow, maybe even longer than that. So let's check back in with Wolf Blitzer, who also has some more insights right now.
Paula, in the Washington Bureau, as Cardinal Roger Mahony, the Archbishop of Los Angeles, who's now Cardinal Mahony, explain to our viewers what has happened today.
I think the very soul of our country has been severely tested. There has obviously been a great wound upon us, and there's great, certain people's minds, there's great anguish, there's great outcry, but there's a numbness and an emptiness. And I think when the President called upon to reach into the inner depths of our being and find that source of light, I think he has given us the insight we need. We in this country are people who, by and large, believe in God. We are people who believe in prayer. And I think this is the time, this is the moment when we need to rally our sense of belief, our unity as a people who believes in trust in God.
And as we speak, Cardinal Mahony, we're taking a look at some videotape of the devastation at the Pentagon, not very far where we're right now. When parents will try to explain this evil occurred today, how should they explain that to their children?
Well, I think this is a precious moment for parents and families this evening, because I think children will be particularly terrified as they see all of these horrible things unfold on television. I think parents need to gather their children. I think they need to gather the family. And in whatever faith tradition they might have, they need to link today with their scripture, with the Bible, the Hebrew scriptures, the Quran, whatever belief system they have. This is an excellent moment to do it. I think also something that's significant today, as I drove over to the headquarters tonight, and the city is quite dark. it occurred to me that terrorists live in darkness, and their evil deeds, they do not wish those to be seen. So I'd say to parents tonight, gather your family, get out a candle. If you have a candle, light the candle as a family. Let the children in the family see the hope that is in that light. And I'm hopeful that the President is going to declare a day of prayer this week, hopefully for all of us to come together in our various faith communities. But just as the terrorists tried through darkness to bring down the spirit of our people, I'd love to see people light in their home, maybe put one in the front window. Let that light of hope and trust in God's providence in our lives, let that shine across our country tonight and tomorrow.
Cardinal Roger Mahony, the Archbishop of Los Angeles, thank you so much for those words. And I just want to throw back to our Aaron Brown in New York, remind our viewers that first crash occurred almost exactly some 12 hours ago when that first plane crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
Well, thank you, and particularly thanks to the Cardinal. Those were extraordinary words and much needed, I think, to remember how we might deal with the issues here with our children. I think all of us at some point today have wondered how we are going to explain this to them. Larry Eagleburger has been a part of a number of administrations in the diplomatic positions. He's, I think, familiar to many of you as well. He joins us from Charlottesville, Virginia, I believe. And good evening to you, sir. It's nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
I want to go back a few hours to a conversation you had, because if I remember it correctly, you talked sickly about things that came up in the President's statement. One is that we need to be proactive. There needs to be proactive in attacking terrorist groups before they attack the United States. And this is the point the President made, that it is not enough to go after the terrorists. You also must go after those who harbor the terrorists. Heartened by the President's words tonight?
Very much so. I thought it was a superb speech. I'll tell you something. I think we're all going to find that the American people are much tougher than some of the comments tonight that I've heard would imply. And if you have the leadership that the President demonstrated tonight, and if we carry out the words he said, and we do in fact act hard against not only the terrorists but those who have housed them, I think we will find that we have struck a real blow for beginning the end of this terrorist tragedy that's taken over the world for so long. We won't win it all at once, but if we now really start to take seriously the words that the President said, both in terms of attacking the terrorists and those who mother them, I think we can begin to see this thing turning around, and I think the American people will be totally in support of that.
Secretary Eagleburger, what is it that you've heard from commentators or anyone else that made that perked your ear there, that suggested the American people did not have the resolve or did not have the toughness to deal with this?
Well, I don't want to carry it too far, but what I've heard is, they're all shaken. There's some implications that we're not going to sort this out too quickly. All I'm saying is, whether we've been shaken or not, if you watch what in New York City today, and particularly the police and the firemen, also average New Yorkers, in the ways in which they responded to try to take care of each other, I was in fact very much impressed by their guts and their ability to deal with these things in a rational way. And I think it showed a great deal about the city of New York, which has not always been my favorite place, and it also showed a great deal about the American people. And I think you're going to find be prepared to back the President all the way now. In this sense, I do think it's like Pearl Harbor, because it's Pearl Harbor that led us all to come together to defend ourselves against the Japanese. I think this is Pearl Harbor in a sense, in bringing us now to look at this terrorist issue as in fact we should look at it. If we don't deal with it now, it will be so much worse as the years go on.
Secretary Eagleburger, good to talk to you again. If I could just a second, one thing he said, of all of the images that we've seen in the 12 hours that we've been here, it is a scene of New Yorkers calmly evacuating the area, very slowly walking, no panic, no screaming, helping one another, that has stayed with us. It is not the most dramatic picture, but it is one of the most telling pictures we have seen about how people respond in moments of extraordinary crisis. Paula?
Well, to tell you, Arian, the story that hasn't been told is the generosity, the spirit of the New York people. I mean, I'll just get a bad rap here, but the fact is there was a plea made for people to donate blood, and at many area hospitals, there were as many as 4 to 5 hour waits.
Yeah.
People lining up.
This is a city that has taken a number of terrible hits in recent time, but in moments like this, it is truly the best of us that we saw today. And I don't think it's simply New Yorkers. I think we would have seen this most anywhere else. But they're a tough group out there below us, 30 or 20 floors, and they handled an awful, awful experience today with extraordinary calm, to which I think we all are grateful.
All right, right now I'm going to check in with James Calstrom, who was formerly of the FBI. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Sir, can you explain to the public how it is possible that 4 commercial airliners were hijacked in a several-hour period?
We can explain that right now, Paula. I mean, we'll be answering those questions in the future. I can tell you this, that everyone in law enforcement and the intelligence agencies prayed and hoped that something like this would never happen. It has happened. I thought the President gave a great speech tonight. I was particularly impressed. It's a bit redundant from the other speakers, but his discussion of there will be no difference between those that committed this horrendous act and those that supported, harbored, assisted this act. I think that's a very, very point. And as the days roll out, the United States, this great country we all live in, and the heroism that you saw on the streets of New York, I saw that day in and day out in smaller tragedies, and I'm sure we see that throughout the United States. But as the days wear on, the United States and the Allies, if they carry out what the President said, we'll be far better off for it.
If you would, sir, though, would you come back to the vulnerability that was exposed today? What is significance that 2 planes successfully hijacked from Boston? What is the significance of the fact that all 4 of these flights were cross-country flights?
Well, I mean, I think we can read into that, Paula. I don't know the answers. It would seem like the interesting and tragic thing is that people would give their lives that could also fly sophisticated airplanes, that they apparently could get on these airplanes through generally good screening techniques. I heard one report that they were carrying knives or box cutters, and that could be.
How do you get through security with box cutters on you?
Well, I'm not going to go into all the different ways that could happen. Know exactly what happened. I don't think now is the time to try to figure that out. Obviously, people want to know that answer, but I think now let's concentrate on the dead, the families, those that are still alive in the rubble in New York, in the Pentagon, in Pennsylvania. Let's work like crazy to find out this. That's what's going on right now. And let's bring those folks to justice. And let's do what the President said. Let's see no difference between those that helped it, harbored it, assisted it. Let's do that.
If you would walk us through the process that begins tomorrow. Rescue workers still are not able to penetrate that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center because of falling debris, because of smoke. Walk us through what we can expect tomorrow.
More of the same. I mean, I think everybody is 24 hours a day now. I mean, I saw reports just a while back that close to 200 New York City firemen are missing. 40 or 50 New York City police officers are missing. And certainly all the people that are in the World Trade Center are missing. So there's been a valiant attempt already to save lives, and that'll continue.
All right, Mr. Calstrom, thank you so much for your time this evening. Right now, Aaron and I are going to hand this back to Wolf, who continues to stand by in Washington.
Thank you very much, Paula. And I want to report a senior administration official is telling CNN that the President's National Security Council will be convening once shortly to review what has happened and presumably to discuss some various options about what is happening. President Bush, of course, will be participating together with his National Security Advisor, Condoleezza, Secretary of State Colin Powell, the Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and the Vice President Dick Cheney. When we get some information on this, we'll report that as well. But I want to bring in CNN's Sustrin. You were at National Airport early this morning when that American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon. What did you see, Greta?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I was on a flight on a runway to go to New York. It was canceled because they said 2 planes had run into a building in New York, so they canceled our flight. I got off the plane. I headed back to my car to come back to work. I was on the rooftop of National Airport's parking lot, which is about blocks from the Pentagon, and I heard funny. Well, no, first my husband said to me, "We better get out of here," and I thought it was a little bit strange. My husband's acting a little bit like an alarmist. I had to look at him. I heard something funny. I looked over, saw something. I'm not sure quite what it was, but low level. Then all of a sudden there was silence. Then there was a kaboom, and then smoke came billowing out, and I knew that it was the Pentagon. The Pentagon, 2 blocks, of course, from National Airport, hidden behind some buildings, and there was just smoke and debris flying all over, coming up in the air. Obviously, a very terrible sight.
And we're taking a look at some live pictures right now. You can see the fires still continuing at the Pentagon now, some 12 hours later. What was your first thought, though, when you heard that kaboom? Did you have any sense what was really going on?
At that point, I knew there was a big problem. I knew it was the Pentagon, and I knew that something horrible had happened, and I could see the magnitude of it. And it was really one of terror, because we had no idea was coming. Was National Airport next? It was only 2 blocks away. Cell phones went down. I tried 2 cell phones, was having difficulty getting through. I finally did get through this, but the traffic was tied up. You heard plenty of sirens and almost no information till I got in the car and did find out what happened. And always, in addition to having to witness this, several hours later, of course, I learned that someone who I know quite well, Barbara Olson, who's appeared on this network a number of times and whose husband is the Solicitor General of the United States, was one of the fatalities on the airplane. So, obviously, and many other people, of course, are suffering tonight. But that, of course, is dismay.
And all of us, of course, who've worked at CNN knew Barbara Olson very, very well. Hearts and our condolences go out to her family and Ted Olson, the Solicitor General. A very, very sad day for the Olson, of course, for the entire country. Greta, put on your legal hat. What is going to happen legally right now? Walk us through what we can expect.
Well, first, obviously, I can't tell you what the President of the United States is going to do, but there seems to be at least something the country is going to do. The President obviously has indicated the country is going to do something. But assuming that is done, something is done, the President, there's also the possibility of some sort of legal remedy. It's not much of a remedy, but you can it has happened in the past is that we've gone over and nabbed terrorists, brought them back to the country, and tried them for terrorist acts here on American soil or acts that they've committed against American buildings overseas. And of course, they can get the death penalty if proven guilty. What's interesting about this and what people should know is oftentimes it's done in a conspiracy, and if you have any involvement in a conspiracy, for instance, you just stick your toe in the water of a conspiracy, you're in for the whole thing. So a lot of people can be brought into a conspiracy for almost just a minor act aiding the conspiracy, not just the ones who are responsible for planning and causing the deaths, but if you in any way just assisted a little bit, you're in for the conspiracy, and you could face the death penalty.
All right, Greta Van Susteren, thank you very much. Stand by. I want to go back to New York. Aaron, Paula, and Jeff are standing by. Guys, take it over.
Well, thank you. It is another day in Asia already. The Nikkei is open, the Japanese stock market. It is already down 5.5% to a 17-year low. This is not unexpected. It is the kind of thing that happens when there is instability in the world and there is instability in the day. Certainly in our world today. Jeff, it seems like days ago that we began this. Tell me where you are right now.
I was thinking about waking up this morning in a city that was going to have a primary election for mayor and other city offices, in a country that was worried economy that might or might not be flattening, kids back at school for the first month, at a time when the big issue, when big events, when horrible events seemed behind us. That was the political climate we've all thought we'd been in. And we're going to wake up tomorrow in just a completely different country emotion.
Wake up to a city tomorrow where the majority of the businesses below 14th Street, the World Trade Center are shut, public schools closed, parochial schools closed, all private schools closed, no flights coming or out of the country, stock market closed. It's a new reality. And as Jeff expressed earlier on, I think you said it pretty pointedly, our luck ran out.
It is, when I walked off here for a short break around 6:30 or so, I thought about my daughter, who's 12 and a half, and I wondered if she, in her school, was taken into the gymnasium as I was in November of 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated. I remember everything about that moment, and I wondered if she will remember every bit of that moment as well. I wondered.
December 7th, 1941,
Yeah.
September 11th, 2001. I think this date may well have been infrared.
Larry King Live is coming up in just a moment. Before we go to Larry, we want to take you back to one of those moments today. It happened at the Capitol. Democrats, Republicans, senators, representatives gathered on the steps of the Capitol to show that the government was running, that they were there, and the country was strong.
Tonight with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with gold. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Tonight, America under attack. Horrible images as terrorists strike against symbols of wealth and power. The casualty count unknown, the damage unspeakable. I'm Larry King. We'll have a full hour with lots of guests. We begin with the governor of New York, George Pataki. Governor, what can you tell us when you bring us up to date on statistics here? We have to go through this. Firemen, policemen, people, what?
Well, Larry, we're just not looking at statistics yet. We're still doing everything in our power to do the searching and rescue efforts because we hope there are still people to be rescued. The city has the finest emergency forces anywhere in the world, and we've augmented them with our National Guard and state emergency forces as well. And there's an ongoing effort to try to rescue as many people as possible and to make sure we provide the best possible care to those who have been injured. So the time for counting is later, the time for action is now, and that action is underway.
We do know, however, that 200 firemen and 78 policemen are missing, right?
We do know that numbers of police and fire are missing, and it's a tribute to their heroism, that they went down there and risked their lives to protect others and try to save other lives. And you know, Larry, this is a great day for America. Out of the darkness, you see the spirit and you see the hope. I was at St. Vincent's Hospital a little while ago visiting some of the injured policemen, and they were asking about if they could go back to try to do more to help uncover their comrades and the people who are still at risk. So the spirit is strong. We will get through this.
Governor, you've been close to being inside and near this. Can you tell us what's going on?
Well, there's still very great risk downtown of possible additional bill lapses, so that we've ordered, along with the mayor, New York City south of 14th Street to be shut down. And right now, it's simply a matter of trying to contain fires and work through the rubble. We National Guard heavy wreckers and tow trucks and others on trying to help out with the police and fire who are going through the rubble and trying to just find as many people that we can save and rescue and help those who need our help as possible. At the same time, we're making sure that the city and the surrounding area is as secure as possible. And again, Larry, I got to tell you that the spirit of the people has been enormous. They haven't been intimidated by this horrible, cowardly terror. I was just out on a block where for blocks people were lined up waiting to donate blood, not cowed by this terrorism, but showing their faith in America and belief in tomorrow, and that's what we have to make sure triumphs here.
Governor, how close have you gotten to the scene itself?
I've gotten downtown, but I haven't gotten all the way down to the towers themselves, perhaps later on. But what I've been trying to do is coordinate response and make sure that we have the best possible efforts, and I believe we do. And Larry, I also want to say that the cooperation, not just of the city and the state, but the surrounding states, the federal officials have mobilized resources from around the country to help us out, and they are here. And we've gotten expressions of support and condolences from around the world. And we're going to get through this. We're united as a people. We're strong as a people. And we will get through this and make America and New York even stronger.
We know the military's on full alert and aircraft carriers are coming to Europe. Is there fear of possibly more?
Well, Larry, I think the federal government's looking to reassure us by having this presence, and we're delighted to have that reassurance. There can never be guarantees. No one predicted this. No one anticipated or had advance warning of this attack. So you never know what tomorrow might bring. But my understanding from my communications with the President and the White House is that they are unaware of any additional specific threats. Obviously, we are on the highest possible state of security and alert, and will continue to be so.
Where were you when you heard of the first crash?
I was in the city, and I got a call to turn on the television. There was a plane hit the World Trade Center, and then I saw the second one, and immediately called the White House and spoke with the President in a very short period of time and urged him to shut down the airspace around New York, and they immediately shut down the airspace around the country. And who knows what else may have happened if the President hadn't taken that step.
He was in Florida, so he patched you right through.
Right.
What was his response when you got him on the phone?
He was very supportive, offering to do anything the federal government could do, told us that they had gone to the highest possible alert and were undertaking all the security steps that could possibly be taken. And then immediately after that, he shut down the airspace around the country, to his credit, and I'm pleased that that step was taken.
Will New York airports open tomorrow?
We're not predicting at this point. We'll stay in close touch with the federal emergency officials. They are calling the shot, the ones who are in charge of the security analysis, and they'll make the determination when the New York City airports should reopen.
Thank you, Governor Pataki. Thanks for giving us the time.
Thank you, Larry.
Next, we go to Washington, D.C., where James Baker, the former Secretary of State, is standing by. Is this, Mr. Secretary, a failure on the part of American policy?
I don't think it's a failure on the part of American policy, Larry. I think that there were perhaps some lapses in security. It would be well, I think, for us to consider beefing up some of our intelligence capabilities, particularly our ability in the areas of human intelligence, which we have been sort of de-emphasizing since the mid-70s. But I don't think it's a policy failure. And if by that you mean that it's linked somehow to what may or may not be happening in the Middle East peace process, I would be very leery of making too direct a connection there. You know, my favorite suspect here, and I have no inside information with respect to this, is Osama bin Laden. He seems to be the favorite suspect of a lot of people. And this guy has done some things in the past that didn't depend on whether or not we were making progress toward peace in the Middle East or not. I mean, if you remember the bombings of the embassy in Kenya and Tanzania, the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. So I wouldn't make too direct a connection to the Middle East peace process.
The President said we will take action and see no difference between those who committed the crime and those who harbored them. That's a direct threat against anybody around this. Do you expect to see retaliatory action soon?
Well, I don't know how soon you will see it. I would expect to see it. We have contingency plans. We had them way back when I was dealing with these issues for the United States. And I remember well, as a matter of fact, Larry, when I was meeting with the foreign minister of Iraq in the lead up to the Gulf War in 1991, and I warned him against using weapons of mass destruction against American forces. I said the American people will demand retribution, and we have the means to exact it. And I think they took that to heart. They didn't use weapons of mass destruction, but I think the American people, following the tragic events of today, are going to demand retribution, and I think the United States does have the means to exact it, and I think we will.
Mr. Secretary, when you fear terrorism, as all of us have to fear it to be logical human beings, it's around us, did you ever think of anything like this?
Not anything of this scale. I mean, you have to really be amazed, or at least I'm amazed, at the degree of success. 4 airplanes were hijacked, 75%, 3 out of the found their targets. We haven't had a hijacking in this country in over 10 years. And yet these people were successful in hijacking the aircraft, not only hijacking them, taking control of them, flying them into their intended targets. It really is rather surprising and rather amazing. And I'm reminded also, Larry, of the successes that American counterterrorism and counterintelligence forces have had through the years. I remember during the time that I served, any number of instances where we would have a threat and we would catch it in time and we would roll it up. We would prevent it from happening. That happened over and over and over again. It didn't happen today, quite tragically. We didn't catch this one.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good seeing you.
Thank you, Larry. Good to see you.
Secretary James Baker, the former Secretary of State. Now we go back to New York. Standing by are Teresa Ward. She worked in the World Trade Center, in the number 2 World Trade Center on the 33rd floor. Bill Heitman, who worked on the 81st floor, was also working at the time of the 93 bombing. John Averone, who works at the World Financial Center, that's right next door. And Tim Cavanaugh, who worked a quarter mile away from the World Trade Center. He was on the phone to a friend who works in the World Trade Center, was suddenly cut off. And producer in New York, who's been on the scene, she's outside, there's Rose, all day it seems, on top of this. Let's start with Teresa. Who are you, Teresa? What happened?
I was in my office, just starting my day, booting up my computer, having my coffee, and we felt the building shudder. And at first we didn't really know what was happening, but we all sort of walked out of our offices and looked around. And as we looked out the window towards the West Side Highway, we saw nothing but paper and debris floating from the sky. It was, overwhelming.
Did you panic?
Actually, we didn't. There were people in my office that were in the 93 bombing, so everyone just sort of decided to leave, and everybody left early fashion via the stairs, and it was very orderly. In fact, everybody was really calm, so we were fortunate in that regard.
Now, is it true, Teresa, when you died, they told you it was okay to go back in?
No, actually, what was, we were in the stairwell. I was on the 9th floor, and there was an announcement on the PA system that basically said that there was an incident in One World Trade, but that 2 World Trade was okay, and that you could return to your offices. It was okay. And at that point, a few coworkers and I jumped on the elevator, and we thought for a moment about going up, then thought better of it, and decided to go down. And at that point, we had no clue what was happening with One World Trade or 2 World Trade. And when we got out to the street, it was just pandemonium.
Teresa, know why you didn't go back up despite the fact the announcement said you could?
Well, it just seemed like there was so much going on, and we felt that it would be better, as everyone was exiting the building already, to just gather with everybody from my firm on the concourse level. So it just seemed like the sensible thing to do at the time, and in retrospect, probably saved a lot of lives.
Good instinct. Bill Heitman worked in World Trade Center 1, the first building hit. He was working on the 81st floor. What was happening? And you were also in the 93, right, Bill?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. What happened at the moment of impact? Where were you? What happened?
At the moment of impact, I was knocked out of my chair, and we just briefly panicked and headed toward the middle of the floor to get away from the windows. And then we headed for the stairwell and started heading down from the 81st floor in an orderly fashion. And some people that were suffering from asthma, aside from some people that were suffering from and some injured, it was actually weirded going down, until we started getting down to the 30s and the 40s.
Then what?
And the firemen started passing us, and we're collapsing on the stairs.
The firemen were collapsing?
Yes, just from the loads they were carrying, the oxygen tanks, the hoses. It was really bad. It was see these guys.
Did you say to yourself, "Here we go again"?
Yes, I did. But at this particular point, it didn't seem like it was a bombing, and after the initial crash going down, it seemed like the worst of it was over.
And you did or did not know it was a plane?
We had heard when we were in the stairwell, probably, it took a total of an hour for me and the people that I was to get downstairs. We had heard when we were about halfway down that a plane had, some kind of plane had hit, but at that point we thought it was small. A helicopter, a small craft airplane.
As soon as you got out, what did you do?
I beg your pardon?
When you got out of the building, what did you do? Did you hang around? Or?
As soon as we got down to the lobby level, I myself was surprised at the damage that there was to the concourse level of the Trade Center. I thought at that point the condition would look not as damaged, but as soon as we got downstairs, we were walking in ankle-deep water, and there seemed to be this an urgency to just get us out of the building, where I thought we were just going to be directed to like triage units or something. But once I stepped outside onto the street, there was something really wrong, and that's when I think the fear of the buildings collapsing really became apparent. And I had only been out of the building less than a minute when tower number 2 came down.
Oh boy. John Ivarone, you work at the World Trade Financial Center. That's next door. What did you see? Where were you?
I was coming back from a coffee break, walked onto our trading desk and saw, everyone watching the TV monitors, which was, I didn't know what the heck was going on. I thought the market was going to go crazy or something. And then someone told me that a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. It sounded like a boom. It sounded like actually a big bomb, and that, everyone was just calm at first, but a couple of my traders ran by me, went immediately down the stairwell and started evacuating. I just followed them, went down to the, right by the seaport, I guess, seaport area, right by the World Financial Center, and you could just see it. It was just, smoke was billowing out.
The booms you felt, John, were from the second plane, right? Because they were already looking at the accident of the first plane?
Right, exactly. The boom was certainly from the second plane. But, it was amazing. It was just standing across the street, because my building is right across the street from the World Trade Center. And, and just watching, there's people up on the 8th floor just waving.
What did you see? Did any people jump?
I saw 15 to 20 people jump. It was, without a doubt, it was the most... at first I saw a little debris coming out, and then you saw... It was definitely bodies the way they were. It was something you can never ever imagine. Like even in movies, it was the saddest thing I ever saw
John,
in my life.
Was there any fear for your building and your safety?
Absolutely. Being right across the street, of course. I guess when something like that happens, you don't start thinking about your building. But thank God the one guy I was following just started running away, and I followed him, and we got to a place in Battery Park where you can actually, we just saw people waving for like helicopters, anything, and then just, and I guess in fear of getting burned or something, they just leapt.
So you were an eyewitness to death. You were an eyewitness to people jumping.
Absolutely.
Oh.
It was, and I didn't realize it until, getting home and watching on television what I'd really witnessed, and then I had...
Boy. Before we talk with Tim and Rose, we understand we have on the phone with us a member of the New York City Power Rescue Team. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am.
Okay. What is the name of your group? What organization is it?
Well, actually, we're fugitive recovery agents, and we're down here offering our assistance with federal authorities. We're waiting for the coordination, and then we'll be going in with any other rescue teams.
Can you tell us where you are right now?
We were right down at the building assessing the damage for my team, and it was a little bit smoggy, obviously. We're covered in soot right now, and we're taking our break until we can coordinate what's going on.
What early assessment do you have?
Right now, it's a mess. It's like Beirut down there. It's really a mess.
Can you describe it a little more? What do you see?
A lot of debris all over the place, obviously. chairs. We even saw air bears over the place. That was
Really?
unusual, yes. Glass buildings 7, 8 blocks away, smashed. You know, it's just devastation, completely.
And have you seen any bodies?
Not yet, we haven't. We're waiting for everybody else, wait for coordination to get together, all the federal authorities, also state authorities, and then we'll join a team then.
And what's your role?
I am actually, we are tunnelers, really. We will go through the debris, small cracks, where, you know, anything that we can do.
How do you do this?
It's what we do.
You've worked lots of things, nothing come to this naturally.
No, nothing. I've never experienced something like this before.
How long do you think this is going to take to go through?
A long time. A long time. There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done.
Thank you very much for speaking with us. We'll be in touch again.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Back to the New York Bureau and Tim Cavanaugh, who works about a quarter-mile away from the World Trade Center. As we understand it, Tim, you were on the phone?
Actually, my friend's brother was on the line with him, and they got cut off immediately. And then I was on a conversation with his brother, and he told me that his brother had heard the first crash, and informing his brother of what had happened. And then all of a sudden, the phone got cut off from him, and that was the last he's heard of his brother since. I brought his pictures so that maybe if there's someone out there who can see him, who has seen him, or if he's in a hospital somewhere, maybe someone can call and let him.
Can we see it?
Sure.
Where's the picture?
It's right here on my hand.
Want to hold it up? Okay, so we get a close-up of this. And he worked in the building?
He worked for Kenneth Fitzgerald on the 102nd floor. It's a guy I coach with. I've known him my whole life. He's a great man.
You are probably resorting to prayer.
Actually, I walked from my office, which is a quarter-mile away, and it was desolate. It was like a nuclear bomb had gone off, and there were ashes like the street, like about 1 foot to 6 inches of ashes, if you could imagine that, walking down the street. And I walked over to Our Lady of Victory Church, which is right street from Wall Street. And Wall Street, usually they have the barricades there. There was nothing. It was gone. And you know, I picked up a piece of paper, and I saw the paper and read it, and it was from the 106th floor of the World Trade Center, and I just knew that it was, you know, you couldn't imagine it. It was like being in town Beirut in America.
Good grief. On the scene is Rose R.C. Rose is a CNN producer in New York, a veteran CNN producer, and a very capable CNN producer. Where were you when this happened this morning, Rose? I can't hear Rose. Okay. I'm sorry, Rose. Okay. We'll have to check back with you, Rose. We're having difficulty. Let's go to Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. Jamie, first, we've heard the briefings earlier. What kind of shape is that building in?
Pretty bad shape, Larry. It's nearly 12 hours after this plane slammed into the side of the Pentagon. The building is still burning. The firefighter, they have the blaze contained in an area, but it's still not under control. In fact, if you look right behind my head, you can see some flames licking out of the roof there. That's part of the firefighting technique of trying to cut the roof open and let the fire burn through in order to put this out. Nevertheless, the Pentagon is vowing, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and President Bush both saying that the building will open for business as usual tomorrow. That may be possible if they just open the other side of the building, where, of course, the Secretary's office is, the Pentagon briefing room, the National Military Command Center, all on the other side of the building. You know, in some ways, there was a little bit of luck in today's incident in that this part of the building was under renovation. That meant that some of the new space that had just been renovated was not yet occupied, and it also had improved fire retardant capability. And on the old side, we're basically in this direction, that part of the building, people had just moved out to get ready for the next phase of renovation, so there weren't nearly as many people as might have been in the building at that time. Nevertheless, Pentagons expect the death toll to be high, but they are not saying publicly what they think that death toll will be. Larry?
And Jamie, have you been able at all to see the aircraft?
Well, you know, earlier today I got right up next to the building and I took a look at some of the pieces that were outside. They were only very small pieces of that American Airlines jet. A cockpit that was all, a window that was all smashed, part of the fuselage that was bent and twisted. But most of the parts of the plane are still inside the building, according to people who've been in and seen it.
Thank you, Jamie. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. We have a panel of senators joining us, and before we check with, here is just a moment of what the statement made tonight by President George Bush at the White House. Watch.
These acts of mass murder intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
We'll be hearing in a while from a terrorist expert in aviation. It will also be the former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, and we'll be checking with right now. A panel of 4 distinguished senators have joined us in Washington. They are Senator John Warner, Republican of Virginia, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. Senator John Kerry, Democrat of Massachusetts, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, including the Subcommittee on International Operations and Terrorism. Senator Dianne Feinstein, Democrat of California, member of the Select Intelligence Committee. She's chairing this Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Technology, Terrorism, and Government Information. And Senator Fred Thompson, Republican of Tennessee, a member of the Select Intelligence Committee, a ranking member of Governmental Affairs. We'll start with Senator Warner. Was this a failure of information techniques tonight and today, Senator?
Well, Larry, I spent much of the afternoon with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and indeed had an opportunity to talk with the President from the Pentagon. That we assess tomorrow. Tonight, be for those who've lost lives, the wounded, their families, and we look upon this as the greatest tragedy in the history of our country, but also one of its finest hours, when we've seen this country come together like never before, whether it's the firemen or the rescue operators or the military all over the world, and we stand with one voice being spoken by our President, and he did very well tonight.
Senator Kerry, did your committee on international operations and terrorism ever actually fear something like this?
Absolutely, absolutely. But let me join John, and I know all my colleagues, in just expressing, I mean, I think all of us here in Washington are feeling in very personal ways the loss of what's happened here. I know that I had one friend I know of already on that plane from Boston, and I dread the learning of perhaps others, but for thousands of families tonight, there is just a huge loss, and I think in every American, there's a sense of, there's a fury, and it's burning fury about this, and a determination to do what is right about it. We have always known this happened. We've warned about it. I regret to say, as I served on the Intelligence Committee up until last year. I can remember after the bombings of the embassies, after TWA 800, we went through this flurry of activity talking about it, but not really doing the hard work of responding. We need to do that now, and I'm confident that the size of this, the nature of this loss and the nature of this attack are going to motivate everybody to come together to do that. And I think that's imperative. And we also, I think, Larry, I was heartened by the President's comments tonight, need to make certain that those countries that sponsor terrorism, that support it, that harbor these fugitives, are as much a part of the problem as those who engage in the terrorist act themselves. And we need to make certain as a country we respond to that boldly and bravely, and not recklessly, but boldly.
Senator Feinstein, what are the next few days going to be like? There's going to be opinions from, what's your read on what's next?
Oh, I think there are many of us that feel that this was an act of war against the United States, that its loss is our human loss is going to be extreme, that the deviltry, the cunning, and the evil behind the act is extraordinary, and that we need to respond, and that America needs to come together with a unity and a purpose and respond. We cannot be a paper tiger. This act, in my view, it wasn't coincidence now that the World Trade Center has been the victim twice. And I think it's a symbol of America, and it's a symbol of what we want to protect as well. And so I think tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, the leadership has announced that there will be a resolution on the floor of the Senate for many of us. And I'm one that believes very strongly that rather than arguing over missile defense, the asymmetric threat against the United States is the most serious one. And we've had a good indication of that today.
Senator Thompson, President John F. Kennedy once said, when asked about his own safety, if someone is willing to give up their own life, that is almost impossible to protect against. What do you do when you have people like today, obviously there's more than 10 of the total 4 planes, who died for this? How do you counter that?
It's very difficult. I think there'll always be a window of vulnerability that we'll have. We're living in a different world now. I think we let our defenses down a bit after the Cold War and wanted to enjoy the peace dividend. But the fact of the matter is the world's a more dangerous place in many respects than it has been in times past. We're now seeing the other side of the technology coin. Technology has been a wonderful thing for us, but it also allows bad people to do bad things that they couldn't do a short time ago. We have one form of that today, probably in the communications area. There are several other threats out there, though. The missile threat is one of them. It is real. The cyber terrorism that could shut down our computers and our communication networks and our transportation system and all that is very real. We simply have to get about implementing the policies, appropriating the funds necessary to address these across the board.
Senator Warner, what do you say to Americans in their grief about what they should do? You try not to let terrorism affect you, but people are not going to go easily to airports tomorrow. What do you say to them?
Have faith in this great country. We've survived, although this is the worst, we've survived other crises. I see tonight in Washington among my colleagues, we're no longer Democrat, Republican. We're united as a Congress behind our president, and we're going to take every step. Number one, to find out what happened and it cannot be repeated. And secondly, we're a nation under the rule of law, but we will relentlessly pursue and hold accountable those who did this crime against our citizens.
And when we pursue that, Senator Kerry, does America as a nation pursue it legally through world courts, or does it take off?
There are 3 ways to pursue it, Larry. One is multilaterally, which takes more time. That's the way George Bush, the father, did it in the Gulf War. You can do it bilaterally, you and another nation, you can reach and work together, and you can do it unilaterally when the circumstances call for it. I personally believe this is a circumstance because of the nature of it. As Diane said, as many have said today, this is an act of war. The difficulty is, unlike Pearl Harbor, this is a stealth enemy. Japan was identifiable. We knew where to find them ultimately, and after chasing around, and we could identify. Here, we know there's a great certainty among many people about where the fingers point. But ultimately, we don't want to be a terrorist ourselves. We have to do what we do with the knowledge and the certainty that we can determine, but we must be prepared, absolutely, to move unilaterally if we need to the honor and the civility that we stand for. And I think that everybody in this country would support that based on the proper response with the proper information.
Senator Feinstein, what if? What if it's bin Laden? If it is bin Laden, what do? You go into Afghanistan, you look for them, you bomb, what do you do?
I don't think America can be a paper tiger in this instance. This was a major attack, and let's face it, there isn't going to be chaos. We're not going to bend down. We are going to rise up as one people. And it's got to be stopped, and you have to ferret it out. I agree with what Dick Holbrooke said on this network earlier. Got to work with our allies, the NATO allies, particularly Russia, China, and the moderate Arab countries. That's Egypt, that's Jordan, that's the Saudis. And we have to make a statement that is so strong that any country that harbors, that trains, that gives money to, that supports, becomes an enemy of the civilized world. Because if this can happen here, it can happen in other places. Terrorism, as our report will say very shortly, isn't a crisis, it's an ongoing condition. And we've got to change the condition. So I must say, I feel very strongly about this, that the United States must respond. Those of us that have had the classified briefings over a period of time understand some of the networks that are functioning out there, even in this country, as a matter of fact. And it's not too difficult to put together 2 and 2, and I think get 4.
All right.
Larry,
Senator Thompson,
I just say that
quickly.
Putin was one of the first heads of state to call our president. And the Secretary this afternoon, colleagues, I was there when he talked with the Russian defense minister. That's an example of the type of support we're getting. The world has got to come and help us solve this problem, because terrorism is a common enemy to all of us.
And Senator Thompson, if the state that harbors them is as responsible as those who commit it, therefore are those civilians in peril?
Yeah. The powers that be in those nations have put them in peril. Saddam uses his civilians, as we know. There's no way around that, but we've got to face up to it. I agree with Ann that the greatest deterrent that we can have is the knowledge and the minds of the terrorists around the world, that there will be swift, accurate retribution. Unfortunately, there's just no way around that.
And Larry, could I just
Thank you. We're out of time, but we'll do a lot more with you in the nights ahead with all 4 of you and others. Secretary William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense, will be joining us. As we go to meet him, there was an extraordinary scene on the Capitol steps tonight. Look at what happened. Watch.
As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress convene tomorrow.
September 11th, 2001. That date will inject our brains. Joining us from Washington is former Senator, former Secretary of Defense, William Cohen, Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. Were you shocked, or was there an expectation of something like this?
Well, I, like every American, every person watching this, was shocked to see the act of terror actually being perpetrated on the screen, and the horror that we all witnessed. Was I surprised? The answer is no. We have known for some time that Osama bin Laden and other organizations have targeted the United States abroad and at home. We formed the so-called Hart-Rudman Commission several years ago, and they filed 3 reports, the last of which was quite prophetic, indicating that we should anticipate acts of terrorism on American soil by terrorists who may, in fact, use weapons of mass destruction and engage in nearly simultaneous types of multiple attacks. And so it doesn't come as a surprise. It comes as a surprise or shock to see the horror that we have witnessed today. But we have got to take more measures. I agree with much of what has been stated this evening, but we also take care that we don't engage in the wholesale slaughter of innocents abroad. We have to go after those groups and those who support those groups in terms of our responses.
So we don't go in and bombs away. What do we do?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure we have the right information. And we don't want to prejudge the matter, although those footprints of guilt would seem to lead in one very certain direction. I think we go to those who are harboring the suspected groups and serve them notice. I think President Bush did that very forcefully tonight, and that they must produce those individuals, and certainly they will face a number of consequences, and I don't think we have to spell them out. There will be certainly diplomatic, economic, and perhaps even military action, but we should await for the President and his national security team to deliver that particular message.
You worked there for a long time. Were you a little surprised that the Pentagon wasn't better protected?
Well, the Pentagon, as you note from its proximity to the airport, really cannot be better protected in terms of aircraft flying near the airport and passing over the Pentagon itself. It's been one of my worst nightmares over the years to be out on the parade ground or in my office and know that at any time a plane could, through either accidentally or be directed into the Pentagon itself. There is virtually no way that one can protect the Pentagon against that type of attack unless you banned all flights going into National itself, but even that might not be sufficient. So it's almost impossible to protect against an airplane engaging that type of activity.
What do we do about a bin Laden? We've heard the name, we've seen him occasionally. He's obviously been involved in acts of terrorism over the year, but what do you do about someone like this?
I think the first thing that we should resist doing, and that is focusing solely on him. To the extent that he is responsible, he will be held accountable and he will receive just punishment. But there may be other bin Ladens out there, and there'll be more following. What we have to do to eliminate the climate under which they're allowed to train, to be funded, and to perpetrate these acts. Senator Warner talked about President Putin calling President Bush today. I was in Moscow a year ago when one of the bombs went off destroying one of their buildings. I went on national television pledging the United States to work hand in hand with the Russian people because they were being terrorized. And so this is an international problem. We have to gather our allies and say this transcends all borders. When America is wounded, the rest of the world bleeds as well. And what happens here can have a dramatic impact on the life and the lifestyles of so many the world over. So we are in this together, and every American is in this together. Much like we came together after Pearl Harbor, we're coming together now, and we will respond as one nation.
And Mr. Secretary, it must be asked, how did they get on these airplanes?
Well, that's to be determined. Obviously, they were able to slip through the security. They may have had inside assistance. You may have had a situation in which another group has been placing sleepers for a year or so or less. We don't know exactly, having assistance to allow them to get on. There are many ways in which that could have happened, but that's going to have to await the investigation itself by the FBI and others.
Thank you very much, good friend. Always good seeing him. Not under these circumstances, though. William Cohen, the former Secretary of Defense. In a moment, we're going to talk with Tim O'Brien, the CNN correspondent, close friend of the Olson, as was this program. Barbara Olson passed away today on American Air Flight 77. Brian Jenkins with us in Los Angeles, the terrorism expert. Arthur Woke, the famed attorney who has done a lot of work involving aviation and who is, we understand, every man tonight. Before we check in with Tim and Brian and Arthur, tonight on the Capitol steps of House and Senate. Watch. Ted Olson is the Solicitor General of the United States. You know him very well from the many, many appearances he made before the United States Supreme Court and the Florida Supreme Court in the question over the election of Bush over Gore. His wife is Barbara Olson, who appeared on this program so many times in the last 4 weeks, almost every night. Barbara Olson was on American Air 77 that left Dulles, bound for Los Angeles, and crashed into the Pentagon. I spoke to Ted Olson today briefly, and it was just sad, so sad to speak to someone who had just lost his wife. Another gentleman who spoke to him was a much closer friend to the Olson family. He's Tim O'Brien, CNN correspondent. He called Ted on the phone. We understand, Tim, that you were at their wedding.
I was in their wedding. I was also out at his house this afternoon along with a number of other friends. It was a very sad afternoon.
Now, I know he told us she called him, but he went into detail with you. What happened during that call? This is the only information we have on these terrorists.
She was able to call him twice. How she could pull that off, we don't know, but she did. The phone went dead the first time after a very brief conversation, maybe less than a minute, and she called him back. And she said to him, "What do I tell the pilot to do?" Vintage Barbara, ready to take charge. She was in the back of the plane, huddled with other passengers, and we're told flight personnel and presumably the pilot. She said that they were armed with knives and box cutters, paper cardboard cutters. If they're armed with other weapons, such as machine guns or any kind of gun, you'd think she might have said that first, but she said no, knives and box cutters. I asked Ted, did she tell you how many people were there, how many hijackers were there? And Ted said no, refer to them in the plural, so there was more than one. What about nationality? Did you get any sense of that? No. Motives? No.
They were all in the back of the plane, right, Tim? The pilots and the passengers were herded to the back of the 757.
That's the understanding I get from Ted, correct.
So whoever took over that plane was up front, and one of them had to know how to fly it.
Presumably that's the case. Yeah, but you know, that's speculation, and we don't know for sure. It's conceivable there was a co-pilot who still may have been in the cockpit. We don't know, but there were flight personnel and most of the passengers huddled in the back. Incidentally, Barb's not supposed to be on that flight today. Her original plan was to fly to California yesterday. Today is Ted Olson's birthday, and she wanted to be with him last night. And so that was the cost.
And when she was on the phone, Ted had already known about the crashes in New York, right?
That is correct. He did tell her about that, so she had a good idea of what she was up against. She knew about the 2 crashes at the World Trade Center.
You stay with us. Brian Jenkins, you're an expert on terrorism. You've been involved in things like this for a long time. Nothing compared to this. Were you shocked?
Shocked, but not surprised.
Not surprised?
Not surprised, no. The possibility of a large-scale terrorist attack on this country is something that we have anticipated for a long time. There have been previous incidents involving multiple coordinated attacks. We have dealt with previous situations where it was either threatened or certainly a concern of the authorities that a hijacked aircraft would be crashed into into the middle of a city.
But from what Miss Olson described them as having, how did they get on the plane with that?
Well, it depends. I mean, that's difficult to say, and we don't know. I mean, people do board aircraft with all sorts of small things.
And get on?
And potentially get on. I suspect that's going to change now, but I mean, people board aircraft with small penknives. They board aircraft with various kinds of metal objects. It does, however, raise some questions about how they were able to get on the aircraft and take control of the cockpit. This is not a standard hijacking where somebody seizes a passenger hostage and orders a pilot to fly to another city.
And in fact, in 3 of the 4 operations, they succeeded.
They did succeed.
The one that went down in Pennsylvania was obviously heading for Washington, is that correct? And something must have happened.
That's a safe presumption.
Arthur Woke, you're an expert at aviation accidents. You've been involved in the courts, often dealing with this, and we understand you're quite angry at this. Why?
Well, because to me, it's disgusting to hear the attitudes of the politicians inside the Beltway saying that the government is in charge. I thought the government was in charge this morning. Where was the government yesterday, 5 months ago, or a year ago when this was unfolding? Where were the national security agencies that are supposed to protect us from this? Where are our allies who are supposed to be part of this anti-terrorist network? Why are there no sky marshals on aircraft anymore? Was that a budgetary consideration of the FAA? Maybe that could have stopped it. So what bothers me, Larry, is that we're talking about burying what may be 25,000 people. There weren't supposed to be any more Pearl Harbors. We put in place a system to prevent this from happening. This is not a minimal terrorist act. This was something that required the cooperation of many, many people. And I don't understand, and I'm sure many of our viewers don't understand, how this could possibly happen. Where was the government?
All right, before I have Brian respond, Tim O'Brien, I know you're a reporter, so you're going to be objective about this. Does Mr. Woke have a point?
I think he does have a point. How much of a point depends on perhaps where you sit. Certainly there are some security breaches here. One of your guests pointed out that we haven't had a terrorist hijacking in 10 years, and maybe we have gotten a little lax. But we also have to recognize when people are willing to give up their lives to stage something like this, it's going to be very hard to stop under any circumstances.
And Brian, what do you make of what Arthur said? I mean, obviously, there was a failure today.
There clearly was no question about it. We have to determine what with regard to intelligence, with regard to security.
But at the same time, we have to realize that there is an ongoing war. There's a constant flow of information, threats, warnings, information passed on by intelligence agents. And many times, by evacuating an embassy, by issuing an alert, by raising the level of security, these attacks are thwarted. Those victories are invisible because you can't count things that don't occur.
So we could have averted 14 things last month. We didn't know about it.
It is entirely. But what we do see, and certainly saw dramatically today, are the failures. When the intelligence fails, when the security fails, that's what we were faced with today. Can we get better on security? Yes. Can we provide absolute security? Absolutely not.
Arthur, you know, as I quoted earlier, if someone wants to give up their life, that's awful hard to contain, isn't it?
Larry, I think I agree with that. I think that we are supposed to have a system in place to prevent this from happening. And you can't stop terrorism at the gate at the airport. You stop terrorists before they enter the country. You stop them by investigating their cells when they're in the country. You avoid this by exercising as much security operations as you possibly can. I'm no expert in security. I'm just a guy who saw it on CNN Live today. And all I can tell you is that there weren't supposed to be any of these in this country, and the people who are supposed to have been in charge were asleep at the switch, in my opinion.
And also, since you're an expert on pilots and things, we realize that whoever did this was able to commandeer these aircraft.
Not
able
really.
to fly them.
Not really. Remember, we have no sky marshals on the aircraft, so we have no one armed on aircraft randomly to prevent this from happening. The door that separates the cockpit from the rest of the airplane is really just a symbol of security. It's not real security. And finally, it doesn't take someone who's a rocket scientist to fly an airplane once it's airborne and to fly it into a building. So you don't have to be a sophisticated pilot to accomplish this, sadly.
All right, let's do what we haven't done yet today, and since this is a special edition of Larry King Live, and will be Mr. Court the Week and CNN 24 hours a day, let's include the audience. Knoxville, Tennessee, hello.
Yes, sir, Mr. King. I was wondering what you and the panel thought about the possibility of the United States Army shooting down the plane over Pennsylvania. I know the Pentagon has denied it, but if they knew that plane was heading for sea, is it possible that they did? And if they didn't, would they have later if it had gotten farther?
Yeah, Tim, this is supposing, a plane's heading in, it's got passengers, it's going to go to the White House or to Camp David. Do you shoot it down?
If there's that threat, you may have to, but certainly that can be taken before that threat materializes. First, you try to make contact with that plane, find out where it's going. But if it appears headed for the White House or the Pentagon or the Capitol or Camp David, and it's off route, that may be the only alternative you have, and it would make sense.
You agree, Brian?
In some cases, yes. The reality, however, in terms of major urban areas, airports are located in urban areas. Planes take off. It's not a long flight from Dulles to the Pentagon. It's not a flight from the airport in the northeastern part of the United States to New York.
How about the caller, though? You've got a plane, you know it's diverted. It's obviously not going to San Francisco.
That certainly is one of those horrible decisions that someday I suppose someone is going to have to make.
St. Louis, hello.
Hello. My question is, we seem to have become very complacent, and we're being very sophisticated and very rational about how to respond to this. However, on all our channels, and on CNN, which, by the way, I think has done a fabulous job, Osama bin Laden seems to be the suspect here. We've heard his name for years, and he continued to operate. And my question is, he supposedly 3 weeks ago gave notice that this was going to happen. Where was everyone? Who dropped the ball? I know there's only so much you can do, and you said they might have averted 14 other incidents last month. No one averted this incident.
Tim, was that a fact? Did we know that bin Laden had made some sort of threat 3 weeks ago?
There was knowledge that he made some kinds of threats, but they were general, and there was nothing new about that. He's making threats all the time. I think this may underscore the point made by Senator Feinstein earlier in the show, that it's not just an attack or a war that we must declare on individual terrorists, but rather on terrorism itself. Wherever it exists, the United States and other countries should be working to eradicate it, root and branch, or sooner or later it may strike home, as
Brian?
it did today.
I agree that Osama bin Laden certainly does make threats all the time. We can't shut down. I mean, the number of threats coming in from Osama bin Laden, not just Osama bin Laden, but other organizations against the United States, is a continuing flow of information. There probably has not been a day in the last 10 years when there were not terrorist threats made against the United States somewhere in the world.
And Larry, that's just the point, you see. That's just the point. Terrorism didn't start yesterday. It didn't start last year. In fact, we both remember for the last 30 years or 40 years we've been talking about the seriousness of terrorism. It's really about time that we get our act together so that we don't wring our hands after the terrorist act has already occurred and people have lost their lives. We're supposed to be able to prevent this. You know, they call it the 21st century threat. Well, it may be the 21st century threat, but we have the 21st century capability to deal with this threat. And obviously we're not
Are you saying, Arthur, every flight in America should have secret people on board watching the flight, that it should be treated as El Al treats every flight?
If that's what it takes, then that's what we have to do.
Indianapolis, hello.
Good evening, Larry.
Hi.
Like Miriam Amins, I watched in horror from work today, all day long. My question, actually the question I was asked by my 13-year-old when she got home from school, is this going to change our entire way of living? Not in the sense of being afraid. What about fuel prices? Today I went to work, gas was $1.62. I come out of work, it's $3 and $4 a gallon.
Really?
What about our...
Tim, what do you think the most stark changes will be?
I'm less worried about fuel prices than civil liberties, which may be sacrificed in the aftermath of this. And that may have to be the case. A great Supreme Court justice once said the bill is not a suicide pact. We will have to take steps to protect ourselves, and some of those steps we may find repugnant today, but they may become necessary. I think that should be of concern to everybody.
Brian?
Well, the fact is that we've found in other places where terrorist campaigns have been waged, life does go on. Nonetheless,
but it changes, doesn't it?
It does change in a way where we will see probably...
Or do we get complacent?
If nothing happens for years and years, inevitably we will get complacent again. However, the magnitude of this is going to leave a deep scar on the psyche of the American people. Now, that can turn into the kind of resolve, the kind of determination that the previous guests have been talking about. But it also can make us, in cases, a more callous, harder-edged people. We are where the United States probably was on now December 8th or 9th, 1941. This generation, which felt so safe, has never experienced anything like this. This is greater probably in casualties, I suspect, than the London Blitz.
And Arthur Walk, do you want massive lines at airports? Do you want intensive security? Do you want people to get to the airport 3 hours before a flight?
No, on the contrary. I think the system we have needs to be made better. I think we need sky marshals on aircraft, but I think the people who are responsible for our security, both domestically and internationally, have to get down to work. That's really the problem.
Tim O'Brien, we began this segment, and by the way, CNN, of course, will be on top of this 20 hours a day, and we'll have more special guests tomorrow night as well here on Larry King Live. But Tim, I'm going to leave on Barbara. I understand Rudy Giuliani is in New York. Rudy?
Yes. Essential, then obviously do it. The upper part of Manhattan will be open. But if tomorrow is a day in which you want to stay home and stay with your family and give comfort and support maybe to other people that have been affected by this, it would be a good day to do that. Yep. The point that Richie Shearer makes is people are wonderful, and I mean this in the best sense of the word. We've had thousands of people that have come to help. When I was down at the site near the World Trade Center, I met a lot of the National Guard's people that the governor has sent, really wonderful young men and women. We have enough volunteers. We have more volunteers, frankly, than we need at this. And what we need to do is to focus efforts of the professionals that are there in being able to do the recovery and try to save as many lives as we can and restore services as quickly as possible. We may be asking for more volunteers tomorrow and the next day and the day after, but right now we don't need any more volunteers.
Mr. Mayor, I don't hope that there are people who are
Yes.
still...
Yes, there's hope. there's hope that there are people that are still alive.
How is the rescue effort hampered by the darkness? What do you
We moved a lot of lights in so that the area is being lit now, so that I don't think the rescue effort is going to be hampered by the darkness. The rescue effort is hampered by there's still fire, there are still unsound structures, and it's still dangerous. The rescue effort is now taking place. But if you're asking me, is it hampered? It's hampered because of the conditions, not because of the nighttime.
Is there a long procession of heavy bulldozers and other heavy construction equipment making its way down to lower Manhattan? What is that going to be used for?
That's going to be used to move debris out of the way so that the emergency vehicles can get out quickly, so that we can get the ambulances in in a more expeditious fashion than we've been able to do. And I want to thank the Deputy Mayor Rudy Washington, who has spent most of the day coordinating, getting all of that emergency equipment in the right place, ready to move. If you go along Houston Street, you'll see hundreds of pieces of equipment that are lined up to move in and to take debris out. And now they've started doing that. And I think that's probably what you observed. You probably observed them starting the effort.
Are you concerned about the city tonight in light of all of the things that have happened during the daylight hours today?
Am I concerned from the point of the actions and activities of the people of the city? The policeman is out in large numbers. You want to explain the force that you have out there? And no, I'm not concerned. But
we're pretty much out in full force this evening. Southern Manhattan, as you know, we're primarily concentrating on the rescue efforts. The rest of the city is basically, some of the entry points are shut down. The tunnels are shut down. As of midnight, there will be no more traffic to Southern Manhattan from 14th. We're going to shut that down. I think the city's pretty sure, and we're going to continue doing what we're doing in the rescue effort, and just hope for the best.
Reports of lawlessness, reports of any looting or anything?
Absolutely not. There's been no reports of looting or any other problems out of the area. And as I said, the boroughs are working pretty normally. And so far, so good.
Mayor, did the President's comments tonight, and have you spoken to him against it?
No, I spoke to him earlier today, and I only heard the very end of his comments because I was coming back from the World Trade